What's going on, guys? Hexadaze here, and in this one we're going to do something just a little bit different. I want to talk about what I think is one of, if not my biggest issues with Zenless Zone Zero, and this is how Hoyoverse presents the kits of characters to players, and more specifically, overly complicated and long skill descriptions. I'm not a stranger to skill descriptions in Hoyoverse games. In fact, I played and covered Genshin Impact for years over on another channel, but for whatever reason, skill descriptions in Zenless Zone Zero feel even worse than they did in Genshin. In this video, I want to explore this topic and give my thoughts on why these overly complicated and long skill descriptions exist in the first place, why they're a problem, and offer ways to improve what I believe is a partially broken system. I'd love to hear what you guys think in the comments because who knows, maybe I'm alone. So with that out of the way, let's get right into the video. So why am I making this video in the first place, and does it even really matter if skill descriptions are a bit over the top? Well, Hoyoverse games and gacha games in general are supposed to be casual, and people that play these games, if we're being honest, they probably have ADHD. This means that they're either going to obsessively try to learn a new character's kit, or more likely, they're just going to bypass the written skill description altogether and start using the character without this knowledge. For me personally, as a guide maker who tries to fully explain character kits, I've found this problem pretty bad in ZZZ for being so early on in the game's life, especially coming from a very similar system over in Genshin. Instead of worrying about maybe when to use a skill in combat or how it synergizes with other characters, players have to spend a bunch of time up front reading a character's kit before they feel like they have a base understanding of how to use them in the first place. So where exactly does this problem come from? It's really easy to just say skill descriptions are too long, but why are they too long in the first place? Because if I'm guessing, it isn't exclusively just Hoyoverse loving being as wordy as possible. In some ways, these open world gacha games appear to be trying to mimic the skill tree of MMOs or action-based JRPGs. MMOs will typically have 8 or more skills to choose from, so your skills that do damage can be separated from your skills that apply buffs to your character or another character on your team. I played a ton of Blue Protocol at the launch in Japan, and the game does a great job of demonstrating this while still being simple for an MMO. Each character has 2 types of normal attacks, alongside 4 tactical skills which do damage or provide buffs, an ultimate skill, and slots for 4 passive skills with a choice in which skills you want to equip. In a very similar vein is Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, which is an action-based JRPG and plays very similarly to current generation gacha games. Characters in Grand Blue have normal attacks on top of 4 equipable skills, which can be selected from a list. The game also has a skill tree, which is where you can unlock new skills, buffs to your current skills, and gradual upgrades to how these skills work, such as extending the duration. While these games offer customization of your character's kit simply by swapping skills in and out, Zenless Zone Zero will let you selectively utilize or level portions of your kit that you're most interested in using without being able to selectively remove skills that you're not interested in using altogether. With games like Genshin, Zenless Zone Zero, or Wuthering Waves trying to kind of mimic these action JRPGs or MMOs in their combat style, they're trying to fit a ton of skills and buffs into essentially 3 buttons to cater to a mobile audience. The problem in Zenless Zone Zero, much like Wuthering Waves, has become worse by introducing QuickTime events and new attack types when swapping between characters. And this isn't to say that we as players don't like complexity. But if combat simply consisted of a couple of skills with limited depth, it'll be increasingly difficult for developers to sell new characters. Sure, there are a lot of people who pull characters entirely based on aesthetics and design, but if all a new character brings to the table is this, the devs are definitely going to miss out on sales. Another unique problem to gacha games is the fact that not all players will be able to pull every character that's released, and therefore team compositions need to be more flexible to accommodate this. In JRPGs, where you get all available characters with the box price of the game, character kits can be dialed in to be more unique, as players can guarantee to be able to put together any team. In a gacha game, characters are often given portions of their kit which may overlap with other characters to allow for this added flexibility. Finally, it's a pretty common meme in the gacha game community that skills typically get more complex as the game goes on, and the devs feel the need to increase this complexity to continue to sell characters. In fact, over the first few years of Genshin's release, we see the general trend of skill description word counts increasing pretty steadily over time. So now that we know more or less why the problem has to exist in order for us to play the games that we love, what are some of the things that Zenless Zone Zero does that make the problem even worse? My favorite Hoyoverse move is to name every skill with a name that nobody realistically uses and is just way too long. For example, we've got Grace's EX skill, Supercharged Obstruction Removal. Classic. In many ways, this is a non-issue, except that skill names may be referenced under other skill descriptions. Now we have a really long name that doesn't really mean anything and is near impossible to remember that now shows up in the skill description of other skills, which makes understanding any character's kit more difficult than needed. Qingyi is a very good example of this, with their core passive stating, when Qingyi lands a finishing strike on an enemy with her basic attack, Enchanted Moonlight Blossoms, it applies 5 stacks of subjugation to the enemy, and so on. Well, Qingyi just happens to have 4 different types of basic attacks, and I don't know which one specifically is Enchanted Moonlit Blossoms because this description doesn't really mean anything. The font size and layout in Zenless Zone Zero are particularly bad. You often need to scroll to read a single skill description because the fonts are so large, and then again you've got damage multipliers on yet another screen. There's limited use of symbols and font formatting, which can not only draw your focus to the most important information, but also distinguish, for example, one type of buff from another. There tends to be a theme of maybe over-describing things that don't need to be, which adds to visual clutter. An example is Caesar's basic attack Dead End. For her basic attack, it states that you will consume 1 assist point to toss the shield and attack nearby enemies in all directions, dealing physical damage. In this example, nearby isn't really needed, and you could change in all directions to just state AoE. Finally, it states that the character is invulnerable while using this skill. You don't really need to include that the character is invulnerable while using the skill in particular, because if it was applicable after the skill, they would include a duration that it was applicable for following using this skill. Another example we can look at is Caesar's EX special attack Parry Counter. The first sentence in this skill states that Caesar strikes forward with the shield, followed by a powerful thrust dealing massive physical damage. While some of the terms like powerful and massive do provide some value to the reader, they don't really mean anything at all at the same time. The next sentence, if Caesar is hit by an enemy, is another good example. Who else would Caesar be hit by than an enemy? Removing this additional language can really clean up these skill descriptions and just make them easier to read overall. On top of the skill types that we already discussed, Zenless adds even more terms to some characters' kit, such as Ellen's flash freeze charges. We see from her core skill and one of her basic attacks that this is how she can consume these flash freeze charges, but it's not till we look at her dodge and special attacks that we see ways that Ellen can actually gain these, which just adds additional complexity all over the place because none of this is shown or defined on a single screen. Tutorials in Zenless Zone Zero are also really bad. Street Fighter or fighting games in general for that matter have nailed the training and tutorial aspects down. By simply breaking down tutorials into smaller segments, detailing every aspect of a character's kit and how they play in a team would be a huge upgrade. The biggest upgrade to the tutorial process in Zenless Zone Zero that could be made, in my opinion, is simply explaining to players what the developers consider to be the intended rotation of a character, both inside and outside of the stun window, and the ability to practice this rotation in a controlled environment. With that, what are some of the other ways that the devs could improve things in Zenless Zone Zero as far as skill descriptions go? My first suggestion would be to simply make a slider where I can see a reduced or simplified skill description. This could be as simple as removing some of the more nuanced text. As an example, let's use Jane's EX special attack, as there's a couple things I want to touch on with this specific language. First, it states that she leaps into the air to launch a series of kicks forward, then sweeps across, dealing massive physical damage. This could just be shortened to state that she attacks, dealing physical damage. And second, her skill states that the character is invulnerable while using this skill. Instead of stating that character is invulnerable, it could simply just include a word, invulnerable, or a symbol representing invulnerability. Second would be to utilize more symbols and common names along with color coding. Third would be the ability to see what other skills in a character's kit are being referenced by the one you're currently reading as you're reading it. Fourth would be just a better way to find definitions that are referenced in skill descriptions. For example, we know that Caesar's shield strength scales off of her base impact stat. However, the game really doesn't ever define what base impact means. So either having a link to a definition that we could go read, or showing us the calculation of how base impact is calculated would really clear up confusion. And my last kind of piece of advice is that skill trees are a great way for players to gradually be introduced to a character's kit so that you're not overwhelmed by getting all this information at once as you see and are learning a character for the first time. Now, I don't want to make a video just exclusively trashing the ZZZ devs, because I honestly think they are doing a ton right, and I'm honestly blown away by how much has been implemented since the game has been launched. First, the Zenless Zone Zero UI has been slowly improving with each update and does provide good indicators for when certain effects or buffs are present. We've got the ability to see a list of the buffs that are active in the pause menu, which is really cool, and I don't know how many other players realize that this feature is present. The VR training mode is a game changer for me personally, and something that as a Genshin Impact player, I really wanted since day one and never got. The video tutorials for the core skill in particular is helpful, and more of those would be great to explain the other portions of a character's kit. The fact that the developers highlight important stats on the main screen of the character shows a lot of care was put into both how the character's kit was made and just the overall UI. And finally, in the latest patch 1.2, apparently the devs are trying to put me out of a job because they've added in a skill priority indicator to help players figure out which skills are the most important to level, which is awesome. That's all I got for you guys today. If you made it to the end of this video and you're not subscribed, please consider doing so. And for those of you that are, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all soon for the next video.